There are battles that change borders, and then there are battles that break the soul of a people. Alesia was not just a siege. It was not just a military operation. It was a moment when one of the most defiant coalitions ever assembled in ancient Europe looked into the eyes of Rome and realized that resistance, no matter how fierce, no matter how justified, would be crushed under the weight of a system that did not fight for glory alone. It fought to reshape the world in its image. In 52 BCE, on a hill in what is now eastern France, Julius Caesar did not simply defeat an enemy. He engineered the psychological, tactical, and logistical annihilation of Gallic independence. And the world would never forget it. To understand Alesia, you must first understand what Rome was becoming. This was not the Rome of myth, not the Rome of marble and philosophy. This was Rome in its most dangerous phase, hungry, expansionist, perfectly calibrated to turn conquest into infrastructure, rebellion into submission, chaos into order. Rome did not win because its soldiers were braver. It won because it had developed something far more lethal than courage. A military system so adaptive, so ruthlessly efficient, that it could turn impossible odds into inevitable victories. And Caesar, more than any general before him, understood that war was not just about killing. It was about control. Control of terrain, control of supply lines, control of morale, control of narrative. Alesia was his masterpiece. The Gauls were not primitives. They were warriors who had terrorized Rome's ancestors, who had sacked Rome itself centuries earlier, whose tribal confederations stretched across vast territories of fertile land and strategic rivers. But they were fragmented. Tribes competed. Chiefs vied for dominance. Unity was rare, fleeting, born only in moments of existential threat. And in 52 BCE, that threat had a name: Caesar. For years, he had marched through Gaul, dividing tribes, exploiting rivalries, crushing resistance with surgical precision. But then something changed. A leader emerged who understood what Rome feared most: a united Gaul. His name was Vercingetorix. Vercingetorix was young, charismatic, and brilliant. He saw what others did not: that the only way to defeat Rome was to deny it what it needed most: supplies, momentum, and the psychological dominance that came from winning every engagement. So he did something radical. He refused to fight Caesar on Caesar's terms. He adopted a scorched earth strategy, burning Gallic towns, destroying crops, forcing the Roman legions to march through a land stripped bare. It was brutal. It was desperate. And for a while it worked. Caesar's army began to starve. His political enemies in Rome began to circle. The invincible machine began to crack. But Caesar did not break. He adapted. He moved faster than anyone expected, striking at the fortified town of Avaricum when Vercingetorix had ordered it burned. He took it. He fed his legions. He restored their confidence. But Vercingetorix was not finished. He retreated to Gergovia, a hilltop fortress that seemed impregnable. Caesar attacked, and for the first time in years, he lost. The defeat was not catastrophic, but it was symbolic. Rome could bleed. Vercingetorix seized the moment. He sent word to every tribe in Gaul: Rome is vulnerable. Join me, and we can drive them out forever. And they came. Tens of thousands of warriors from tribes that had been enemies for generations, united under one banner. It was the largest coalition Gaul had ever assembled. Vercingetorix was no longer just a rebel. He was the living symbol of Gallic resistance, the man who had made Caesar retreat. But in his moment of triumph, he made a decision that would seal his fate. He chose to consolidate his forces. He chose to make a stand. He chose Alesia. Alesia was a fortress perched on a plateau, surrounded by rivers and steep valleys. It was defensible, provisioned, and held a population of around 80,000, including tens of thousands of warriors. Vercingetorix believed it was where he would break Caesar. He believed that if he could hold long enough, the relief army, the massive Gallic coalition, would arrive, trap Caesar between two forces, and annihilate the legions. He believed that Rome, stretched thin, far from supply lines, facing a united enemy, would finally collapse. He was wrong. not because his strategy was flawed, but because he underestimated what Caesar was willing to do. Caesar arrived at Alesia and looked at the terrain. Any normal general would have seen a nightmare. Attacking uphill against a fortified position with a relief army of hundreds of thousands on the way would be suicidal. So Caesar did not attack. He built a wall, not around his camp, around the entire city. 11 miles of fortifications, encircling Alesia completely, cutting off every escape route, every supply line, every hope of reinforcement. He called it a circumvallation. It was a cage, but Caesar knew that the relief army was coming. So he did something that defied all logic. He built a second wall, this one facing outward. 13 miles of fortifications, trenches, stakes, towers, and traps, designed to hold off an army 10 times the size of his own. He called it a contravallation. He was now trapped between two hostile forces, one inside Alesia, one approaching from the outside. His legions were outnumbered. His supplies were limited. And yet, he had created the conditions for the only kind of victory that mattered: total control. The Gauls inside Alesia began to starve. Weeks passed. Vercingetorix sent out his cavalry, hoping they could break through and bring back help. Caesar's fortifications held. The horsemen escaped, but the message was clear. The walls were real. The siege was absolute. Inside Alesia, desperation set in. They expelled the women, children, and elderly, hoping Caesar would let them pass, or at least that their suffering would buy time. Caesar refused to let them through. They died in the no-man's land between the walls, starving in sight of both armies. It was psychological warfare. It was calculated cruelty. It was Rome. Then the relief army arrived. 250,000 warriors, perhaps more, from every corner of Gaul. They surrounded Caesar's outer wall. For 4 days, they attacked, wave after wave, from every direction, trying to break through, trying to link up with Vercingetorix, trying to crush the Romans in a coordinated assault. The fighting was savage. Legionaries stood on wooden towers, hurling javelins into masses of screaming warriors. Trenches filled with bodies. The walls held, barely. On the final day, the Gauls launched their most desperate assault. Vercingetorix, seeing the relief army attacking from the outside, ordered his own forces to break out from the inside. For the first time, Caesar faced a two-front battle, exactly the scenario he had built his walls to prevent. The Roman lines began to buckle. Sections of the fortifications were overrun. Gallic warriors poured through breaches, fighting hand-to-hand with exhausted legionaries. This was the moment. If Caesar's line broke, the entire army would be encircled and slaughtered. Rome would lose Gaul. Caesar would lose everything. He did not hesitate. He took his personal cavalry, his elite German horsemen, and led them himself into the breach. Not from behind the lines, not from a command tent. He rode into the chaos, visible, unmistakable, his red cloak billowing, his presence alone worth 1,000 men. The legionaries saw him. They rallied. The line held. The cavalry struck the Gallic flank, and the assault collapsed. Panic spread. The relief army, seeing their best chance fail, began to retreat. Tens of thousands of warriors who had marched for weeks, who had believed in Vercingetorix, who had dared to imagine a free Gaul, turned and fled. They would never unite again. Inside Alesia, Vercingetorix watched the relief army disappear over the horizon. He had no food, no hope, no options. He could have fought to the last man, turned Alesia into a funeral pyre for Roman ambition. But he chose surrender, not for himself, for his people. He rode out of the gates, alone, in full armor, and laid his weapons at Caesar's feet. It was theater, it was dignity, and it changed nothing. Caesar took him prisoner, paraded him through Rome years later during his triumph, and then had him strangled in a cell beneath the city. Vercingetorix became a symbol, but symbols do not free nations. Rome consumed Gaul. It would remain Roman for 5 centuries. Alesia was not won by superior numbers. It was not won by better weapons. It was won by systems. Caesar did not rely on heroism. He relied on engineering, logistics, discipline, and the ability to think 3 moves ahead while his enemies thought one. The Romans did not just fight wars. They built the infrastructure of domination. Their fortifications were not desperate defenses. They were instruments of control, designed to channel, contain, and exhaust the enemy until resistance became physically impossible. The Gauls fought with courage. Rome fought with inevitability. And this is the lesson that echoes through every empire that has ever risen. Power is not maintained by force alone. It is maintained by the ability to create systems that make resistance harder than submission, that make defeat feel like fate rather than failure. Rome understood that the true battlefield was not where swords clashed, but in the mind of the conquered, in the moment they stopped believing victory was possible. Alesia broke that belief. It did not just defeat an army, it defeated hope. Today, empires do not build walls of wood and stone. They build networks of trade, systems of information, structures of dependency so vast that resistance seems not immoral, but impossible. The mechanisms change. The principle does not. Dominance is not a moment. It is architecture. And those who forget this, who believe that passion and unity are enough to overcome systems designed over generations, learn what Vercingetorix learned. That history does not bend to courage. It bends to those who master the hidden logic of power. Alesia stands now as a quiet ruin in the French countryside. Tourists walk where legionaries stood. The walls are gone. The bodies are dust. But the memory remains, carved into the DNA of Western civilization. It is a memory that whispers a truth older than Rome, older than Gaul, older than the concept of nation itself. That the strong do not always win, but the organized, the patient, the ruthless in their clarity of purpose, they rarely lose. And when they do fall, it is not to the brave. It is to those who learned the same lessons, who built better systems, who understood that empires are not defeated. They are replaced by the next machine. The question is never whether power will shift. The question is who is building the walls that no one else can see.